Fear squeezed my chest like a tight grip as I pushed the driveway gate shut, the metal creaking under my hold. My heart thudded hard against my ribs, each beat reminding me that today wasn't like the others. This wasn't just another ordinary morning. This wasn't just about locking my property away from the outside world. Today, I was hiding something that had been lying beneath my feet for who knows how long. I turned toward the house, my pulse still hammering from the discovery. A tunnel, a hidden underground passage stretching right under my home. My fingers quivered a little as I wiped sweat off my forehead, my mind replaying the moment the ground caved in beneath my shovel. At first, I thought it was a sinkhole, but then I saw the walls. Smooth, built with purpose. Someone had constructed this, and I wasn't meant to find it. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. The wooden boards hastily thrown over the hole in my backyard felt weak, useless. It wasn't enough. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. Who could I tell? Who could I trust? No one. Not yet. Not until I understood what this was and why it was here. A sharp voice sliced through the uneasy stillness. Jake. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Karen. I took a slow breath, trying to calm myself before turning toward the property line. She stood there, arms folded, her blonde bob shining under the sunlight like a golden helmet. Her lips were pressed into a thin, firm line, and her eyes, sharp, searching, drilled into me as if she could see straight through my skin. I saw you shut your driveway gate, she said, her tone clipped. I nodded, keeping my expression blank. That's what people do when they want some privacy. Her mouth twitched. Since when do you close at this early? Of course, she noticed. Karen noticed everything. She was the type of neighbor who knew what time you left for work, how long your groceries sat in your trunk before you brought them in, and when your lawn needed cutting before you even realized it. Since today, I said flatly. Something wrong with that? Her gaze flicked past me toward the backyard, her nostrils flaring slightly. I don't like secrets, Jake. The way she said it sent a cold shiver through me. Good thing I'm not keeping any, I replied with a forced shrug. She squinted at me, as if peeling away layers, searching for what lay beneath. I hated how she looked at me, like she already knew something, and was just waiting for me to confirm it. You were digging earlier, she said. What were you doing? I stiffened. Gardening, she scoffed. Since when do you garden? My jaw tightened. Since today, her lips curled into a smirk, but there was no amusement in it. You're acting different. You're always different, I shot back. Karen tilted her head slightly, her gaze darkening. You should be careful, Jake. You never know what might be buried under your property. My pulse spiked. Was that a warning? A threat? I let out a short chuckle. That's supposed to mean something. She didn't laugh. Just making an observation. Her eyes flicked to the driveway gate again, and then she pulled out her phone. My stomach sank. Really? I asked, irritation creeping into my voice. You're calling the cops because I shut my gate. She didn't answer. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, and then she pressed the phone to her ear. I clenched my fists, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. This wasn't just Karen being nosy. She knew something. She had been watching, and for some reason, she thought the police needed to know what I had discovered. I turned my eyes toward the backyard, toward the hidden passage I had unearthed. Whatever was down there, Karen had suspected it all along. And now, she wasn't going to let me keep it a secret. The loud wail of sirens sliced through the quiet morning like a sharp knife. My teeth clenched as I watched the flashing red and blue lights bounce off the houses, flickering through the closed gate of my driveway. Karen stood by the fence with a satisfied smirk, her phone still gripped tightly in her hand. She didn't look away, just stood there, waiting for the police to arrive. You really called them? I asked, crossing my arms as the first police car rolled up. She didn't answer right away, just tilted her head a little. You'll appreciate this later, Jake. I doubted that. 2 officers stepped out of the car. The first one, a heavy-set man in his 40s with a tough look, adjusted his belt as he scanned the scene. His partner, a younger man with sharp eyes and a quiet confidence, stood at his side, watching carefully. "Sir, we got a report about a disturbance," the older officer said, looking over my property. "Something about a disagreement over a driveway." Before I could explain, Karen jumped in. "Officer, there's something hidden under his property," she said, her voice urgent. "Something dangerous. I've been watching for months." I knew something wasn't right. I sighed, rubbing my forehead. "It's not what you think. Karen is just—" "Why don't you show us?" the younger officer interrupted, his eyes moving between me and Karen. I hesitated. I could lie, say there was nothing here, send them away. But the way Karen was staring at me, the weight of what I had found pressing on my chest, made me realize this wasn't just about me anymore. There was something down there, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be the only one who knew about it. "Fine," I muttered, "but you're not going to like what you see." I led them through the backyard, my footsteps heavy with dread. Karen followed close behind, her arms still folded like she had won some sort of argument. The officers moved carefully, their hands hovering near their holsters. They probably thought this was just some silly neighbor fight or a case of trespassing. When we reached the wooden boards I had thrown over the hole, I paused. My mouth felt dry as I crouched and pulled them away, revealing the deep black space beneath. The silence that followed was thick. "Jesus," the older cop muttered. "What the hell is this?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "I was digging back here when I found it. Thought it was a sinkhole at first, but then I realized it wasn't natural. Someone built this." The younger officer knelt, shining his flashlight down into the opening. The beam caught smooth concrete walls, stretching into the darkness. The air down there was heavy, unmoving. A shiver crawled down my spine. "This isn't just some random hole," he said. "It's a tunnel, and it goes deep." Karen let out a shaky breath, gripping her arms tightly. I knew it. I knew something was buried here. The older officer stood up, looking between us. "We're going to need backup, and forensic investigators. You said you don't know how long this has been here." I shook my head. "No clue. I only moved in last year." The younger cop's flashlight caught something metallic in the dirt. He reached down and picked up an old, rusted chain. Something hung from it, a pendant. He flipped it over in his palm, his face darkening. "We might have a bigger problem," he said. "This isn't just some forgotten storage space. This could be a crime scene." Karen's breathing hitched. "I need go down there." "No one is going anywhere yet," the older officer snapped. "We need proper gear, safety measures." "You don't understand," Karen interrupted, her voice raw with emotion. "My brother disappeared years ago, right around this area. And I think this is connected." My stomach dropped. "What?" She turned to me, her eyes wide and filled with something I hadn't seen before, desperation. "I didn't call the cops to mess with you, Jake. I called them because I've been waiting for this. For years." The officers exchanged a look. The tension in the air grew heavier as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just about an over-involved neighbor anymore. This was something much bigger. "All right," the older officer finally said. "We're locking this area down and calling in more backup. Until we know exactly what's down there, no one is going inside." Karen clenched her jaw but didn't argue. I let out a slow breath, my eyes drifting back to the dark hole in the ground. I had thought this was my problem alone, but as I looked at Karen and the officers, now speaking urgently into their radios, I realized this tunnel had been waiting for someone to find it. And now, there was no turning back. Wanting to see what would happen next, why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Karen stood with her arms crossed, defiant despite the police presence, while I kept my hands on my hips, trying to keep my temper in check. The two officers were still murmuring into their radios, likely calling in reinforcements, but I had already had enough. "So, what now?" I asked, voice clipped. "Am I under investigation for finding a hole in my own backyard?" The older officer, Sergeant Hayes, sighed and rubbed his temple. "No one's accusing you of anything yet, Mr. Lawson, but this is an unusual situation. We can't just ignore a tunnel that may be connected to criminal activity." I scoffed. "Criminal activity? I was just as shocked as you when I found it." "But Karen," I gestured toward her, "seems to think I'm harboring some kind of dark secret under my lawn." Karen stepped forward, her expression hard. "This isn't about you, Jake. I've been watching this property for years. Something is down there. Something wrong. My brother disappeared, and I always had a feeling it was connected to this house. I called the police because I wasn't going to let this go ignored any longer." Sergeant Hayes exchanged a glance with his younger partner, Officer Reynolds, who sighed and closed his notepad. "Ms. Carter, you said your brother went missing how many years ago?" 17, she said without hesitation. "And I've always believed something happened to him right here." I threw my hands up. 17 years ago? I was barely a teenager. I didn't even live here. How in the world do you think I had anything to do with that? Karen hesitated, but her resolve didn't waver. "I don't know, but I know this house isn't clean." Sergeant Hayes exhaled sharply. "All right, here's what's going to happen. We're going to secure the area. We'll have a forensic team examine the tunnel. But until we have any reason to believe a crime has been committed, Mr. Lawson is not a suspect." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Hayes cut her off with a sharp look. "And Ms. Carter, I'm going to be honest with you. Your insistence on this being something sinister without hard evidence is concerning. Do you have any proof that this tunnel has anything to do with your brother?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. "That's what I thought," Hayes muttered. "You wasted our time over what could just be an old, abandoned underground structure." Karen's face turned red, her fingers digging into her arms. "I know something is down there." Reynolds stepped forward, tone gentler than his partner's. "Ma'am, if you truly believe this is connected to your brother's disappearance, you need to go through the proper channels. Right now, all we have is an uncovered tunnel and a property owner who had nothing to do with it." Karen shook her head. Taking a step back, her certainty wavered, and for the first time, I saw doubt creeping into her eyes. She swallowed, looking at me. "I just wanted to know the truth." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Look, Karen, I get it. If I lost a sibling, I'd want answers too. But I'm not your enemy. I didn't put that tunnel there. Hell, I'm just as freaked out about it as you are." She exhaled slowly, eyes flicking back to the dark hole in the ground. Then let the police do their job. Let them dig deeper." Sergeant Hayes crossed his arms. "We'll do what we can, but I'll be filing a report about this call. If it turns out to be nothing but an old storage tunnel, Miss Carter, you'll have to accept that. You can't keep harassing your neighbors based on gut feelings." Karen's posture deflated. I could tell she wanted to argue, but she knew she was losing ground fast. "And if there is something down there?" she asked, voice softer now. Reynolds nodded. "Then we'll deal with it appropriately. But until then, you need to stop treating Mr. Lawson like a criminal." I crossed my arms. Finally, some common sense. Karen flinched slightly, then turned to me with a look I couldn't quite place. Regret? Guilt? Frustration? I may have overreacted. I huffed out a laugh. "You think..." She looked away, arms still tighter round herself. "I just wanted to believe I was onto something." "We understand," Reynolds said. "But from this point forward, any further concerns need to go through proper legal channels." "Understood." Karen nodded reluctantly, her eyes still fixed on the tunnel, as if willing it to whisper its secrets to her. "Good," Hayes muttered, before turning to me. "Sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Lawson. If you'd like, you can close your driveway gate again." You're free to go about your day. I let out a long breath, the tension in my chest finally loosening. Great. Now maybe I can actually get some peace around here. The officers nodded and returned to their vehicle, radioing in their report. Karen lingered for a moment before finally backing away from the property line, looking smaller than before. As I turned and walked back to my house, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The police might not have found anything yet, but that tunnel wasn't going anywhere. And somehow, I knew this wasn't over. The relief I felt as the officers left was short-lived. The tunnel was still there, a gaping question mark in my backyard, and despite being cleared of any wrongdoing, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling deep in my gut. Karen had finally backed off for now, but something about her desperation gnawed at me. I stood at the edge of the tunnel, staring down into the darkness. The forensic team was scheduled to arrive in the morning, but that didn't mean the unease in my chest would wait until then. I almost jumped when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Pulling it out, I saw a message from an unknown number. Stop digging. My pulse spiked. I scanned the area, my eyes darting over the fence line, the alley, the street. The officers were gone, and so was Karen. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Someone was watching. I typed back quickly. Who is this? No response. A cold knot of fear twisted in my stomach. I could pretend this was just some prank, but the tunnel, Karen's brother, the pendant in the dirt, none of it felt like a joke. I turned and walked back inside, locking the doors behind me. Tomorrow, the police would dig deeper. I just had to make it through the night. The forensic team arrived at dawn, a small crew of officers and specialists in protective gear. Yellow tape was strung across my backyard, the scene now officially off-limits to me. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching as they set up equipment, and prepared to enter the tunnel. Sergeant Hayes approached me, his expression unreadable. We'll be taking this slow, Mr. Lawson. Given the tunnel's condition, we don't know how stable it is. We'll also be documenting everything we find. If this leads to anything criminal, we'll let you know. I nodded, swallowing down my unease. Just be careful. I don't know who built that thing, but someone doesn't want it found. Hayes frowned. What makes you say that? I hesitated before pulling out my phone and showing him the message from the unknown number. His jaw tightened as he read it. Did you recognize the number? He asked. No. I tried calling back. Nothing. Hayes exchanged a look with Officer Reynolds, who had been listening nearby. That's concerning. We'll run a trace, but in the meantime, if you get any more messages, let us know immediately. A shout came from the backyard. We found something. We rushed over to the edge of the tunnel. One of the forensic officers was holding something up, a torn piece of fabric, faded and stained. Karen's voice rang out behind us. That's my brother's jacket. I turned to see her standing just outside the taped-off area, her face pale, eyes locked onto the cloth. Sergeant Hayes stepped forward. Ms. Carter, you shouldn't be here. I had to come, she said, barely above a whisper. I knew something was down there. Reynolds sighed but didn't push her away. We'll take it in for analysis. Karen's hands curled into fists at her sides. And what about what's inside the tunnel? A forensic tech emerged from the tunnel, face grim. It's not just a tunnel. It leads to a sealed-off room. We're trying to get inside now. A cold weight settled in my chest. This wasn't just an old, forgotten space. Someone had locked it up on purpose. An hour passed before the officers finally managed to break into the hidden chamber at the end of the tunnel. The moment the heavy, rusted door creaked open, a wave of stale air rushed out. I wasn't allowed to go inside, but I could see the reaction on the officers' faces. Reynolds stepped back first, shaking his head. Jesus, what is it? I demanded. What's in there? Hayes turned to look at me, his face set in stone. It's a bunker, and it's filled with personal belongings. Bags, clothes, IDs. Karen gasped. Missing people? Reynolds nodded. That's what it looks like. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. This wasn't just about Karen's brother. Whoever built this tunnel had been using it for years. Hayes turned back to the team. Get everything photographed and cataloged. I want every inch of this room documented. As the forensic team worked, I looked over at Karen. She was shaking, her fingers gripping the fence for support. I was right, she whispered. All these years, I was right. I didn't know what to say. I wanted her to be wrong. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Detectives arrived, crime scene analysts combed through the items in the bunker, and neighbors started whispering. News vans hovered just outside the cul-de-sac, waiting for a statement. I stood off to the side, feeling like an outsider in my own home. Karen approached me, her eyes still glassy. Thank you. For what? For not shutting me down. For letting them look. I sighed. I didn't do much. And honestly, I wish I had never found that thing. She nodded, understanding the weight of what had been uncovered. At least now we know. But even as she said it, I wasn't so sure. That night, long after the police had left and the street had gone quiet, I stood in my kitchen, staring out the window. The tunnel entrance was now covered by an official police tarp, guarded by an officer stationed overnight. It should have made me feel safer. But then I saw it, a shadow, just beyond the trees at the edge of my property. Someone was there, watching. My breath hitched as the figure moved, just a slight tilt of the head, just enough to let me know they saw me too. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished into the darkness. The police had found the tunnel, but someone else had known it was there all along, and they weren't done with it yet. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and like this video to continue listening to this type of story daily, and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to know the country in which you are listening to this story. Which country is that? Please comment below.